Okay. Okay, I want to talk about a halachic topic, but in a very not halachic way. That's as follows. There's a shmooze that comes up a lot of different times in a lot of different places about being mishtatif with people who have very different ideals of Yiddishkeit. L'mashal, if you're familiar with the history of Hungarian Yiddishkeit, so to a certain point, all the different kvutzas of Hungarian Jews had to do with each other. And then there was a revolution, and then there was a meeting where the emperor gathered together all the Jews, and there was representatives of all the different kehilas. And eventually the Haredim at the meeting realized that they were never going to have a chance, and they did something called the uptiling, where they all broke off and they went on their own way. If you know, like the Maram Shik led this uptiling to leave from the greater body of Hungarian Jewry. Now, once they left, like they separated from the neologues, so some of the most intense battles in Hungarian Jewry took place between people, meaning between people who called themselves status quo, like they wanted to stay the same, keep the Kehillah how it always was, and people who called themselves, from the new Haredim. Those two groups fought each other more than even Kilu Haredim fought reform. Because to separate and to figure out what the difference was, that's where like the biggest fights happened. Now, in America, in the 1950s, after World War II, when there was a tremendous influx of Jews into America, so there was a big turn towards conservatism. A lot of Jews became conservative, and on the margins of conservative and Orthodox, call it conservadox. Between the conservative and the Orthodox, on the margins there was a lot of similarities. There was a lot of kehillas they could go either way. They could either become conservative, they could become Orthodox. It wasn't so clear exactly where they stood. Now, in the RCA or whatever, like the main body of rabbinic rabbis in America at the time, felt that you could have a rabbi body that's comprised of some conservative rabbanim, some Orthodox rabbanim. They'll sit together, they'll figure out what's good for Yiddishkeit in America, and they'll work with that like that. Now, in 1951, the Hisachtas HaRabbanim got together with 11 of the Gedolei Yeshivas in America at the time, like Reb Aaron, Reb Yaakov, Reb Ruderman, Reb Moshe. I'm forgetting the Telzer Yeshivas, Uchahena, and they got together and they put out a Kolkaira. It was in all the newspapers, where essentially they said that Rabbanim cannot be mishtatif together with Rabbanim from conservatism, and there has to be a total separation between the Orthodox and the conservative. Now, I've spoken about this in the past, but that idea of separating, that Orthodox and conservative have to be totally separate from each other, is a very nice idea, luftish, but it's hard to know what that means in practical halacha. Now, Reb Moshe, in many, many different shuvas, has a huge netiya to be machmer about anything that has to do with conservatives. Anything that has to do with a conservative shul, Reb Moshe is machmer about. And the rationale being that Reb Moshe, being a strong believer in this psak of separating, felt that the only way to separate was to mamish treat them like outsiders. And Reb Moshe held there was no distinction between conservative and reform, and a lot of his shuvas in many different mitzvahs, in Yeridea, in Even Ezer, in Archaim Agaret, Reb Moshe made this strong psak, the strong netiya to mamish have nothing to do with conservatism. Now, one of the hot button things that became like a calling card to be able to tell if a shul was conservative or Orthodox was using a microphone on Shabbos. There were a microphone be'etzem could be turned on by a Shabbos clock. You're not going to turn on any switch, you're not going to really do anything. You're going to talk into it. What exactly the malacha that takes place when you talk into the microphone is not so clear. So a lot of conservative shuls felt that a microphone was doable for Shabbos, and in the 50s, all the conservative shuls started getting microphones, and Orthodox shuls didn't have microphones. Ad kedei kach that I saw in an article somewhere, there was a court case over control over a shul in St. Louis. It was like the board had a fight over control of a shul in St. Louis, where the charter of the shul said the shul was Orthodox, and therefore they wanted to keep a mechitza. Some of the new board members said the shul is conservative today, we don't need a mechitza, let's take down the mechitza. And in court, the conservative bloc brought a proof from the fact that there's a microphone in shul, so you see that you're not living up to the charter, and it's not really an Orthodox shul, it's a conservative shul. So this became like a flashpoint in the battle between Orthodox and conservative, and in Rav Moshe in Archaim Chelik Daled and Tshuva Pei Daled, in a tshuva written late into the 60s, like in 1969, I think, a long time later, Rav Moshe writes an interesting tshuva of microphones on Shabbos that shows you this whole gisha. Rav Moshe, almost always, if you're familiar with Rav Moshe is very clear. Rav Moshe has strong opinions. He has rayas. Sometimes they're mechudesh, sometimes they're not mechudesh. Rav Moshe knows exactly where he wants to go in the tshuva. In this tshuva, Rav Moshe starts off the shabbos by using a microphone. He says, "Bidvar ledaber b'Shabbos a microphone." He says, "Pashat she'aser." The outcome, of course, is that it's aser. The Agudas Rabbanim already put out a kol kaira that he's talking about from 1951 and reiterated in 1956 that it's aser. Even though there are people, and by people he means Rabbanim, who don't understand the reasons, but even if they're Rabbanim and they're Gedalim B'Torah, still, they don't have a right to be chaylik on this body of Rosh Hashivas and Rabbanim who made this psak, and they don't know what they're talking about. And then he says as follows, and this is what's so interesting. Rav Moshe says, you want to know, so why tak is it aser? Why is the microphone aser on Shabbos? Rav Moshe says, ve'var b'kitzer sataymim, shem shnayim sheyesh b'em chashash yisem d'iraisa, v'shnayim shemesav adam d'Rabbanan. Over here, Rav Moshe just goes through, I think it's 5 different reasons, each one of them not super convincing or overwhelming. Rav Moshe says 5 different, like, stadim, why it should be aser. None of them that he brings rayas to, none of them that he mamish takes to the bank, none of them that he even builds up. He just quotes. There's different, and each one of these 4 or 5 things, if you'll go into the sugya of electricity on Shabbos, there's peiskish rate on each one of them. People saying la'aser, people saying lahater, the rabbanans, the raisa. Rav Moshe just brings the attitudes throw everything against the wall. Here's all the reasons I could think of. He says, "L'chein bar microphone aser le'shtamash b'Shabbos v'yam tevein lahakol aflu tzarich gad l'chein aser." Fine. Now in the next tshuva in tshuva pehei, which is a tshuva about hearing aids. Now, hearing aids essentially functions very similarly to a microphone. A microphone takes the voice and spreads it out, and hearing aids just does it inside the air. It catches the waves of the voice, and inside the air it amplifies it so that the person can hear it. There, Rav Moshe goes a whole different attitude. Rav Moshe says, it's a tzairich. Rav Moshe starts making kulas, and Rav Moshe eventually gets to the point where he's makel about the hearing aids in the ear. Now, if you read these 2 tshuvas back to back, it's a strange thing. In tshuva number 1, Rav Moshe leads right away. He knows the outcome is. It's aser, there's nothing to talk about. The reasons are not so convincing. I can't tell you an exact reason. It doesn't matter. It's aser anyhow. Because this is aser, this is how it has to be. When it comes to a pratistik shayla about someone who can't hear so well, is in shul, and now Rav Moshe starts handling the rationale of these actual svaras, Rav Moshe is much more mekel. And this, the dichotomy between the personal shayla of a hearing aid and the public shayla of a microphone, you'll see in the Minchas Yitzchak, Rav Moshe Sternberg has a tshuva about it, all the different places. Because what Rav Moshe essentially was doing over here was saying the shayla of microphones and the shayla of electricity on Shabbos in all its different modern applications became a hapa, an issue for identity almost, between do you identify as Orthodox or not. And this is even though it's a chumrah killer, Rav Moshe is saying it's a chumrah, even though it's a chumrah, this is a chumrah that's pashatim, you have to be on this side of the fence. Now, ad kedei kach, that the people he's referring to, the Rabbanim that he's referring to, Lamashal, there was a Rav Paliov who wrote extensively to be mekel. Rav Unterman, who was the chief rabbi of Eretz Yisrael, maybe in the 70s, he had a Shabbos microphone that he was mekel on. Rabbi Soloveitchik from YU was, in Velav Rafi Biyadeh. He wasn't so sure, but eventually the RCA was also machmer. Moshe held this type of strong stance, because this became an identity issue. Now, I'm just using this to frame something that has to do with us. Ba'atzem, we're officially up to Hadlakos Neiros. So I wanted to talk about lighting Hadlakos Neiros with an electronic light, with a not the light bulbs that we have over here, but a light bulb, an old style light bulb, an incandescent light bulb that has the filament. Could you light Shabbos candles with it? Now, Ba'atzem, it's a halacha shayla, meaning it's a halacha shayla in how electricity works, how we look at electricity. But I want to show you how it's similar to this shayla by microphones in the opposite way, and that's as follows. So, just to run through some of the core svaras back and forth. So when electricity came out and it became available for people, so it was a gross shayla if you could use it or not. Now the first one of the Gedolei HaPoskim who wrote in it was the Beis Yitzchak, Rav Yitzchak Shmelkes. Rav Yitzchak Shmelkes, when he wrote in it, now it's not clear how exactly he understands electricity to be working. It's 2 shvara tshuvas in Yeridea. Rav Yitzchak Shmelkes writes, and he holds that it's asami deraisa to use electricity on Shabbos, and he's writing about which was the most prevalent common shayla of his day, the incandescent light bulb. Now, the incandescent light bulb is basically there's a tiny metal filament, made out of, depends, there's a few different metals it can be made out of, and when the electrical charge goes through the filament on both sides, it heats up this metal till it's glowing hot, and it lets off a lot of light. So Rabbi Yitzchak Shmelkes in his tshuva over there, he says like this. He says in Yeridei Chelik Beis Tshuva Lamed Aleph, he says that V'hinei im yachal levarach al gaz licht electricity licht lahadlik ner shel Shabbos. If a person could make a bracha of hadlakos ner Shabbos on a gas light or an electric light to be yotze, he says v'kasavti the yachal levarach lahadlik ner the chol ma'ar hadavik bekli befilament mikri ner. Now he's saying a two-pronged thing. First of all, he's nemming on that turning on an electric light is mavir. It's fire. It's real fire. When that filament is glowing red hot, it's real fire. And second of all, he says that any time you're going to light something that's connected to like a power source, you could make a bracha of Hadlakos Neiros on that. Now, the second nakuda I'm going to get back to in a second, but this is what he's saying. Now, both of those nakudas, let's do Arish Rishon Al Achron Achron on the nakuda of it being an Issa D'Oraisa to turn it on. So now, many poskim, even poskim who later on were meaning. I just want to say there's two different questions. The question of electricity on Shabbos when it comes to like an incandescent light bulb with a filament that's burning is one question. And the question of electricity on Shabbos when it comes to, let's say, turning on a fridge or, a different household appliance where there's no heat, nothing's getting heated, are two different questions. The question of turning it on with a filament like this, like Hadlakos Neiros, like a light bulb with a filament. So the Beis Yitzchak and many poskim afterwards seem to clearly hold that that's considered mavir midiraisa. Where they're coming from is Yeduah de Kamachlik Rambam Ravid. The Rambam writes that if someone heats up metal to the point where it's glowing, he's over on Maver Midiraisa. That's the Rambam Hilchos Shabbos. The Ravid is Chaylik. The Ravid says when you do that, you're only over on Bishul, which is also the Raisa, but maybe wouldn't be relevant in this case. But this is Machlekes Rambam Ravid, and based on how we paskin, like the Rambam Pashtus, that it's considered Mavir. So the Beis Yitzchak holds that it's Issa D'Oraisa to turn it on Shabbos. Now, in regards to the Hadlakos Neiros part of it, so he's saying a svara. Now, there's a few different nidainim kilu that have to happen to figure out if you could use this for Hadlakos Neiros or not. The nidin that the Beis Yitzchak is addressing is the nidin of that a candle involves a fuel source with a wick and a fire that draws from the fuel source. Electricity seemingly doesn't have it's not so daimah to a candle, meaning even if it's a fire, even if there is some sort of fire there, so maybe that's called eish, maybe you could make barim aeration, maybe you can make havdalah on it, but to call that a candle is, a little bit not so clear. The dimming to a candle is not so clear. So the Beis Yitzchak is naming on for pashtas that since the electricity is drawing from like a source, there's power coming from somewhere else, and then that comes into these wires, these things, and the filament burns. So he looks at like the filament like a wick, and the fact that it's glowing is a fire, and electricity that leads up to it is like the oil that's giving to it. Now, if you say that, then you have to handle, is this considered proper shemen, right? The Mishnah by Mamad Likan says only certain types of shemanim could be used. Is this the right shemen, the wrong shemen? And many places can handle this. B'Shem Zalman Lamashal and Chacham Ben Tzion Abba Shaul both say that a person should light, if he wants to light Shabbos candles with an electronic light, he should use a flashlight, a battery operated light. Because there's kilo oil, fuel stored in a battery cell that's there, and you light it, and then it goes, that's more than with a candle. But if you light it based on the power grid, so that's not fuel, that's constantly being made, and they hold there's a chiluk like that. Others will say different things. Now Rav Chaim Ozer, Rav Chaim Ozer was known, okay, let me do this. Rav Chaim Ozer has a tshuva in Chelik Gimel, in Achiezer. Rav Chaim Ozer has a tshuva as follows. Someone wrote to him if he could include a shtickle about electricity in like a periodical, like a newspaper that was going out. Could he include a shtickle about electricity in the periodical? Rav Chaim Ozer writes that I don't want to contribute on this topic to the periodical. He says to write about electricity. He says why, and he brings like an interesting Messiah over here. In the beginning of the tshuva, he writes as follows. He says like this. He says, everybody knows that using electricity on Shabbos is aser. Rabbi Yitzchak Shmelkes paskins like this in Beis Yitzchak. This is an Av Malach, he says. He says, tells to the tshuva. And then he says, Umashi yesh laden. This that you're going to tell me that there's a conversation to be had. It's not open and shut with the Beis Yitzchak saying, Umashi yesh laden, u'lisvakeach b'zeh, b'zeh ein kedai sheyaveh advarim b'yarchin. To be mitfakeach and to go back and forth on an Indian like this, it's not kedai to do in a newspaper, in a periodical. Asher yisfarsimu hadvarim b'vikuchim shaynim. What's going to happen is it's going to become forsim as a machlekes. Someone's going to write in one way, someone else will write in the other. A whole back and forth. He says, he says, B'shut Shelas David, like Rav David Karlin, Rav David Karliner in Arachaim, he writes about a similar question. I will chaslei lahadfis dvarai b'michtavitim ki anochi me'olam misrachik mizeh. Anachnu v'ashenis, he says, anachnu ke'es b'makam hamayim haroim. We're in a bad matziv. V'talmidim yishtu v'yamusu ki fine. So Chaim Ozer says like this Masorah that he has from David Karliner, that on something that's like a shvera shayla, where there's makam l'tfakeach back and forth, and you could have rayas l'kan, but the Gedolei HaPoskim said that it should be X or Y. The Gedolei HaPoskim said what it should be. You don't open the shayla up that every Bar Rav the Chadiyim could write in his position. So all that's going to happen is someone's going to read it. He's going to see it's a nice kasha from someone who's not really ready to set psak and policy for Klal. He says, I like that. Well, next time he has a shayla, no, it's not the most chamadik shayla in the whole world. He says like such a type of thing. You have to it has to be discussed amongst Gedolim in a serious fashion, not in a periodical. So, and then Rav Chaim Ozer writes a short tshuva to say that it's aser, but this is what he holds. Now, so it's interesting. So Rav Chaim Ozer is really kind of showing us this idea that when it came to paskening about electricity and about really light bulbs at that time, the poskim held that you have to treat it like an Issa D'Oraisa, even if there's makim to say that there's different shittas in the Rishonim and Achronim, and you could make kulas, and you could say it's only a D'Rabbanan. The poskim held, because it would open up, so many shaylas and so many opportunities for Chil Shabbos and so much zilus of the Shabbat, meaning there's so many opportunities if you use electricity on Shabbos that things could go wrong. So Rav Chaim Ozer, B'tzak Shmelkes, and many other Gedolei HaPoskim, the Chazon Ish held like this, held that you have to be noikit like l'chumra over here in a more like extreme way. Now, where does the shal zachos? Is that there's different gviyas edisin. Some say it about Reb Zevin said it about the rugged shaver. In a different shaylas Shuvah Sefer it says it about Rav Chaim Soloveitchik. Others, Reb Zalman in the Haskama to Chalkas Yaakov writes it about Rav Chaim Ozer himself. And Mustama they're all true. Meaning I don't think they're all different stories. Mustama they're all true. But each one of these different places brings a story about these Gedolim who are makbid from time to time. Some nuschayos say to make Hadlakos Neiros on a light bulb. They would turn on the light bulb and say, make a bracha, make Hadlakos Neiros. Some Makaris say they would make Bayir Meiri Eish on a light bulb. Now, they didn't have candles, like they ran out of candles. They were trying to make this psak, like you do with the rabbim, that the electricity is asur on Shabbos. Meaning that you can't use electricity on Shabbos. Very similar to what Rav Moshe was saying about microphones, where the answer is known before even the reasons. Meaning, before I give you the reasons, before I tell you halacha, before I bring you a rayis from Rishonim, what you can tell me back, forth, the psak is what the psak is, because this is what the Gedolim felt needed to be done in these circumstances. And it's just interesting that kulam nizdavgul upon the gechad, like Rav Chaim, the Rugged Shaver, Rav Chaim Ozer, the stories about each one of them, about doing this bedafka, to use it either for Hadlakos Neiros or for Havdalah. Each one's a shtickle different shayla. What Havdalah needs and what Hadlakos Neiros needs are a little different than each other. But interesting that they all had this anhaga. Now there is one more nakuda I just want to mention, like a shayla, the Hatzvi is busy with this, and others, is turning on a light called Hadlakos Neiros? Meaning, are you lighting a candle like that? Or is it just, you're making an electrical circuit, and then begrama, like a candle happens, that something turns into a wick eventually, but you're not lighting a candle, like we did Hadlakos Neiros. Now, there's a Magen Avram. The Magen Avram in Hilchos Shabbos brings down from Maram that, as follows, it says, if a lady was past the Zman and she didn't light candles, so the Magen Avram brings down, she should tell a guy to light candles for her, and she can make a bracha while the guy lights. As I like the Magen Avram. Now, Frekta b'Kiveiger Afanart, and it's a guy in Shulchan Aruch. The Kiveiger asks, "Ein shlichus l'nachri." So there's no hadlaka going on. There's no ma'aseh hadlaka going on. A nachri can't be a shliach. So at best, you have lights being turned on, but there's no ma'aseh hadlaka. How does she make a bracha on the guy's hadlaka? And Kiveiger b'layv tzarchin, he doesn't answer it. Now, Yiach Shia Hanira is that the Magen Avram seems to hold that the mevukish of Hadlakos Neiros on Shabbos is not a ma'aseh hadlaka, like you have to light it like a ma'aseh hadlaka. It's fakir, it's ribei neiros. It's to have a lot of light in the house. So the Hartzvi and others, based on this Havan and the Magen Avram, say that even though normally when you say something's a hadlaka, like l'mashal b'Chanukah or whatever, there's a ma'aseh hadlaka that has to take place, and you can't really make a bracha if you're not doing a ma'aseh hadlaka, and you can't be yotze if you're not doing a ma'aseh hadlaka. It could be by Neiros Shabbos, the bar for what type of hadlaka is needed is not like the same ma'aseh hadlaka like by Neiros Shabbos. It's just there should be lights in the house, and just with doing that, yotze. Now, and there's many different back and forth. Ravadia held like this, like all the way to Kula. Ravadia held that if a lady forgot to light candles, the knas is not negayah for her, because but the there's lights in the house. But David, you Yaitz Hadlakos Neiros with lights now, so it doesn't matter. Shlomo Zalman held, even if it's not an incandescent light, even if it's not a real fire, just it's light in the house, is marked to be Saimach, you could be Yaitz, you could even make a bracha. So the Paiskim seem to have taken this Havana in the Magen Avraham, even like to a further point, where the whole discussion of it being fire or not fire becomes moot, because you don't even really need that for Hadlakos Neiros. But that's where it went. Just to me, it was interesting that this is like seemingly another hechatimtza for the Paiskim to be machriya, a certain chumrah, kilu, to set policy and to advise for the future. Be it microphones, be it candles. It's just interesting when this pops up in Hilchos Shabbos. All right, shkayach.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.